So let us continue with our introduction to literary criticism and literary theory by noting that the word reading, implies interpretation or criticism. The word reading implies interpretation or criticism. So the reading of a text in this context means interpreting the text. So that's what you need to understand. When somebody says a reading of this text, you should extend the context because it means to interpret the text. How do you read the text? How do you understand the text? How do you interpret the text? That's what reading means within the context of criticism. Remember, we do not have one term for criticism. There are many others which we mentioned in the course of this course. So you can read with the grain and you can read against the grain. The critic can read with the grain and the critic can read against the grain. You can read with the grain, you can read against the grain. So reading with the grain refers to an interpretation that flows with the conventional meaning of the text. Reading with the grain refers to an interpretation that flows with the conventional meaning of the text. You are simply interpreting the text based on its first value, meaning, or understanding. How everyone perceives the text, the meaning that everyone tends to agree with. That is reading with the grain. On the other hand, reading against the grain is deconstructive in nature. Reading against the grain is deconstructive in nature. One of the theories that you study on this course is called deconstruction. It is in deconstruction that we read a text against its conventional meaning. We read a text opposite its conventional meaning. And so in that context, you are reading against the grain. You are reading not to agree with the conventional meaning of the text. You are reading not to agree with what the general public agrees is the meaning of the text. You are reading in opposition to how meaning is perceived in the text. You are opposing the conventional meaning. And of course, that is the beauty of literature. That's why I love literature, because your opinion counts, your views count You are not bound to believe what everyone believes. You can have your own view even when it is different from others, as far as you're able to raise enough points to convince. That's what makes literary criticism quite interesting. First, we're able to raise enough points to convince your audience your views stand. And so while some critics do read with the grain, others do read against the grain. I'll give you an example. I did a paper with Professor Imai Manuel of the University of Rio. The paper is online. It's entitled The Example of a Hero, a deconstructionist reading of Eugene in Chimamanda Adichie's Purple Hibiscus. So that paper is an example of reading against the grain, because what we argue in that paper is that Kambili is not the hero in Purple Hibiscus, that she is just a narrator. But everyone perceives the story to be Kambili's story, that she's the heroine, and so on and so forth. That's the conventional meaning. And then Eugene is the antagonist, a bad father who punishes the children and all of that. But in our deconstructive reading of the text, we reverse the reading and make Eugene the hero and Kambili as one of the characters who merely narrates the story. So you might want to see how we did that, how we were able to convince the journal to publish the paper, because of the arguments we raised with evidence from the text. So that is reading against the grain. So it is from there that you begin to see that Mama is not perfect. Mama is not perfect. Mama has her faults. Mama is a murderer. Mama embodies dangerous, radical feminist ideologies and should not be an example to any African woman. A woman who reacts to any controversy in the home by poisoning the husband slowly. So you see that Mama is the most dangerous woman in the text, the most dangerous character in that text. But the conventional reading places her as a victim. So literature is a beautiful thing. All you need to do is to take your stand and have your point and argue, and then your discourse, we call it a discourse. Within the purview of your discourse, your reading is sacrosanct. So the relationship between the reader and the text is transactional. The relationship between the reader and the text is transactional. The relationship between the reader and the text is transactional. Transactional. The relationship between the reader and the text is transactional. That is, the reader uses his or her past knowledge and experiences to navigate the events in the text in order to create meaning. The reader makes use of the totality of his or her past knowledge in a bid to navigate the meaning of the text, to negotiate the meaning of the text. That means that how you understand a text is dependent on the sum of your knowledge up to that point. How you understand a text is dependent on the sum of your knowledge up to that point. There's a text that you read today and you understand it at a certain level. You read that text 5 years after. You wonder whether you were the one who read it 5 years ago. Because your knowledge has increased. Your awareness, your cultural knowledge has increased. Now you are in a better position to comprehend the meaning of the text. So it is not always that the text gives to the reader. The reader also has something to take to the text. That's what you need to understand. The reader takes something to the text. That's why we call it transactional. It's a give and take relationship. You can only harvest meaning from the text based on your level of knowledge. Depending on whether you are a child. For instance, if a child reads a work like Animal Farm, the child will be happy, oh, animals are playing, animals are fighting, and so on and so forth. But when an adult reads it, the adult begins to see that this is just more than animal. It's talking about human beings. Let's just look at meta theory and meta criticism. Meta theory and meta criticism. Meta theory is a conceptual idea. Meta theory is conceptual in nature. That means it exists in the imagination. Meta theory is conceptual in nature. That means it exists in the imagination. It's conceptual. That means it exists in the imagination. It exists at the level of thinking, the level of thoughts, and refers to an overarching literary theory. Overarching is spelled Overarching. Overarching literary theory that encompasses all possible interpretations of a text suggested by the readers. An overarching literary theory that encompasses all possible interpretations of a text suggested by the readers. I'll take that again. Meta theory refers to an overarching literary theory that encompasses all possible interpretations of a text suggested by its readers. It should be noted that there is no meta theory. There is no meta theory, ladies and gentlemen, and that's why I warned that it existed at the level of imagination. That's why I warned that meta theory only existed at the level of imagination. So if you are asked in an examination situation to use a meta theory to discuss a particular text, you should just explain what meta theory means and then say that there is no meta theory and so there's not going to be any criticism. Alright? But some of the people who were not informed will go on to interpret whatever they want to interpret using any text of their choice. Right? Because they were not here and they were not informed. Okay? So if peradventure you're lucky and the examination question comes, and you should use a meta theory, then you should know what to do. And I know that you'll be happy if such a question comes. Good. Then, what is meta-criticism? And is there a kind of criticism called meta-criticism? So, let me start by asking the question, is meta-criticism real or is it conceptual? Alright. Meta-criticism refers to the criticism of criticism. Meta-criticism refers to the criticism of criticism. So you can say that we do not only have criticism, we have the criticism of criticism. And it is in that realm that only the elites can operate. Only the elites, only the eagles can fly at that realm. Okay? The realm of meta-criticism. Okay? Because you see, we have people who cannot even grapple with criticism itself, not even to talk about moving on to the level of talk about the criticism of criticism. Okay, so what that means that we have criticism and then we have someone coming to criticize that criticism. You have a work that probably has applied a theory to a work of art. And then another scholar comes along and picks up that paper and begins to tear it apart, begins to evaluate it, interpret it, say what it means. There was a time that I actually made students to undertake that. It was a very difficult process, assignment. So an aspect of meta-criticism that most students usually practice, especially in final year, is in review of related literature. It's in review of related literature. That is an aspect of meta-criticism that most students usually do. And of course, if it is something that you can do at your spare time to train yourself, you can do it. Like the paper I mentioned, you can pick it up, read it, and then start writing what it means and evaluating it and all of that. You can also write your counter opinion, where the paper is flawed or if the paper is okay, and so on and so forth. It is in these agreements and disagreements that new ideas usually emerge, of which it's not bad to disagree. That is, if the disagreement is done the way it should be done, constructive. Polite, respectful. There's no area in scholarship that is full of disagreement as literary criticism. Because critics have sharp minds. They will see holes in your argument. They will see flaws in what you've said. And they will question everything, including their own ideas. So it's one of the greatest minds, among the greatest minds that engage in meta criticism. You have to note that. Let us move on to classical criticism. Classical criticism. So as we said, there are no meta theories, but we have meta criticism. So those who said that there was no meta criticism, all right. So we also have schools of criticism. We also have schools of criticism. We also have schools of criticism. Schools. 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 They refer to a group of theories that are based on similar large-scale assumptions. A group of theories that are based on similar large-scale assumptions. Theories that are similar are actually grouped into schools of criticism. For instance, we have the linguistic theories of literature. For instance, we have the linguistic theories of literature. What I'm saying is that theories that are usually similar in their principles and hermeneutics could be grouped into a school. So a school is a set of theories that share similar principles and traits. And I said, for instance, we have the linguistic theories of literature, meaning that these theories, there are different theories, but they interpret literature by focusing on the language of the text. The linguistic school. There are other theories that focus on history, using the historical materials in the text to interpret the text. So theories are usually similar. It's not all the theories that are opposed to one another, no. Theories like structuralism and formalism are similar. Theories like new historicism and postcolonialism and postmodernism are similar. And within a theory, you can have approaches. Within a theory, you can have approaches. Within a theory, you can have approaches. Within a theory, you can have different theoretical perspectives called approaches, depending on who formalized them. Take for instance feminism. There are so many approaches in feminism. whether in the Western school or in the African school of thought. Because so most of the feminists don't agree. Remember, scholarship is full of disagreement. You don't have to agree with what someone has said. And if you don't agree, you can also separate and have your own ideas. It's allowed. For instance, the African feminists say we don't want to imbibe the views of Western feminists because their ways of life are not African at all. Okay? We do not seek equality with our husbands. We rather seek complementarity. Okay? Partnership. We want to work together. Our own theory is not radical. We don't even say, because some Western feminist approaches will say we don't even need a man. The woman does not need a man. A man can survive on his own without a man. Or all that the woman needs is another woman. Okay? And some African feminists say we cannot bring that into Africa because it is not acceptable in our cultural stream of thought. And so you have things like womanism that has a Western version and womanism that has a Nigerian African version. You have things like Stewanism, because even within Africa, women always look for different ways to approach, to negotiate their feminist ideology. Some say they don't want to be called feminists. Some say they should call them feminists with a small f. So you have things like Stewanism, Snell sense feminism, Nego-feminism, Madarism, and so on and so forth. So that's the same feminism, but different approaches. So before we talk about classical criticism, we want to look at the meaning of literature. Look at the meaning of literature. What does literature mean? You need to know the artwork. You need to know the artwork very well before you talk about it. So, the word literature has a Latinate root. Has a Latin origin. Has a Latinate root in the word litera. Litera means letter. Letter means letter. That implies that literature is everything that is written down. Literature is what is written down. Literature implies that which is written down. Literature implies that which is written down. So this is the conception of literature in the Western tradition, in the Western critical school. So the problem with the definition of literature as that which is written down is that it is too wide in scope. It's too wide in scope. The definition of literature as that which is written down is that the scope is too wide. The scope is too wide. Because then literature will include mathematics textbook, economics textbook, newspaper, journal articles, because they're all written down. Another problem with the definition of literature as that which is written is that it excludes the existence of oral literature. It excludes the existence of oral literature. It excludes the existence of oral literature. It does not acknowledge the existence of oral literature. When you define literature as that which is written down, you automatically ignore oral literature as a source of literature, as a type of literature, as literature. And of course, this explains why it was hard for the colonial masters to acknowledge that Africa had its own literature, because they didn't see oral literature as literature, because they perceived in that definitional framework, they saw literature as that which was written down. So two problems emerge when you define literature as litera. What is the first problem? The scope is too large. And what is the second problem? You ignore the existence of oral literature. So literature has to be redefined in our age and time. Literature has to be redefined in our age and time. Now, to solve the first problem, the scope, the problem of scope, right? To solve the scope problem, we'll emphasize creativity and imagination in our definition of literature. To solve the problem of scope, we'll need to do what? Emphasize creativity and imagination in our definition of literature. Very important. When you emphasize imagination and creativity, you exclude mathematics textbook, you exclude economic textbook, you exclude magazines and newspapers from the literature that we are looking at. Literature then becomes an object of imagination, a work of art, a creative endeavor. The child of our brains and the product of our endeavor and the materialization of our inventive genius becomes literature. Something born out of imagination. Something born out of the creative enterprise of man. An artwork, not a cookbook. Right? Because when you define literature as that which is written down, that is what you normally talk about when you say review literature. Review literature. Review related literature. Review literature, review related literature in your field. By that we mean discuss everything that has been written down in that area, in that field. So we can talk about the literature of mathematics, the literature of economics, the literature of agriculture, meaning what has been written down in mathematics, what has been written down in agriculture, and what has been written down in economics. But when you limit it to imaginative works, Then you're talking about the kind of literature that we are dealing with in the Department of English. So we've solved that problem. And then for the second problem, we have to include oral literature. We don't have to emphasize writing. We can use the word expression, okay? An imaginative expression of a people's experience. Literature as an imaginative expression, a creative expression of a people's experience. So you don't say writing, so that you can include oral literature. So literature is a structured work of art that mirrors the author's primary world. Should write that down. Sounds so good. Literature is a structured work of art that mirrors the author's primary world. So we define literature as a work of art that endures the ravages of time. Literature is a work of art that endures the ravages of time. Literature is a work of art that endures the ravages of time. Literature is a work of art that endures the ravages of time. So it is literature. It is literature. It is literature when it is timeless and universal. It is literature when it is timeless and universal. That means it continues to be relevant from age to age, irrespective of climes. The work continues to be relevant from age to age, irrespective of climes. You take Shakespeare to Nigeria today, for instance, Macbeth, we still understand it, and it will make sense given what is going on in our society today. Okay? So if you read Shakespeare today, say Macbeth, what problem is raised in Macbeth that we can associate with our society today? Someone should answer. You read Macbeth today, it was written by Shakespeare in the Renaissance period, 16th century, in England. Many centuries have passed, and you read the text today. What problem in Nigerian society can you identify in the text thematically? It is inordinate ambition. Inordinate ambition. The tendency for people to want to perpetuate themselves in power endlessly. They don't want to leave power. They want to hang on to power at all costs. They want to win election at all costs. They want to gain access to the power sources at all costs. Okay? You note how Macbeth wants to be king at all costs, even if it means killing the current king. So that resonates with, and when you read Macbeth, it reminds us of our election time in Nigeria. How people who don't have anything to do with power corridors will do everything, kill whoever stands on their way to get there. So that makes the work timeless and universal because the theme resonates wherever you take it to. After many years, the work has not been become irrelevant, still relevant. So that's the work of literature. That's the work of literature. Literature is also determined by its value. Literature is determined by its value, how it is valued in society. Great works of art will always find their place in the society. Literature is also an aesthetic object. Literature is also an aesthetic object. Sadly, it is the Westerners that know the value of literature. It's the Westerners that know the value of literature. Here, we don't know the value of literature. Our leaders don't place value on literary works, on books generally. Anything book worries them, troubles them. And that's why the writer does not have value in the Nigerian society until they go abroad and introduce themselves as writers. Okay? That's when you know how valued writers are. Because they are cultural icons. With one stroke of the pen, they can assign you an image, an unforgettable image, forever and forever, irreversible. And that is why people do not joke. No culture, no sane culture triples the writers. Recently I read how one laptop company was brought down by a writer because of how the company treated that writer when he complained about the laptop. Because they thought they had everything going for them. Everyone was buying their laptop all over the world. And so maybe just a negligent salesperson or manager in one place just makes a mistake by not attending to that particular person. They didn't know how powerful the blogger was. So the person took it upon himself to let the world know how that company treats its customers. And the company went down. So that's how powerful literature or the writing process generally is. And I've cited instances where even Westerners came into Nigeria and created our works and took them away. A good example is Onitsha market literature. The Onitsha market literature is a Nigerian invention, but the Nigerian government didn't care much about it. The people who valued it were Westerners. They came and studied the literature, took whatever texts were available and took them away. Now they'll be available in libraries in America or in Europe. But it's our literature. We look down on it. We don't value it because of the kind of people we have in power. These people don't like books. I don't know what books have done to them. So imagine you go to the Western world and you say you're a writer and you produce any meaningful work of art. That's why there people do survive basically through their writing. So until we get to that point where I can appreciate our cultural objects, not only literature, but the painting, the artworks. Until we get to that point, then we do not really know what we are doing. It was the same white people who saw the masquerade wore and stole them because they saw the value. They stole them to Europe. Now those artworks are worth millions of dollars, and they won't even hand over them to you. In fact, you need to go through security checks before you can even see one. They have to screen you. There are some that you will never see. But they were made here. And people made them here. We looked down on them. And even when you see one tomorrow, you still look down. You don't see that it has any value. Literature is an aesthetic object. We talked about the value of literature. Literature has value because it entertains. It entertains. It educates. It captures the moments. Teaches moral lessons. Defines a people's mentality and culture. Literature is an embodiment of a people's culture. So, as an aesthetic object, literature seeks to please. As an aesthetic object, literature seeks to please. As an aesthetic object, literature seeks to please. Aesthetics implies beauty. So literature is beautiful. And the beauty of literature is in its use of language. It's in the use of language. The beauty of literature is in the use of language. The narrative texture, the stories told, and the language used in telling those stories. When we are talking about aesthetics in literature, pay attention to the use of language. Because it's the language that makes the work of art beautiful. The style generally. Of course, you cannot study style without studying the language and the structures of the work. So the art object has its own inbuilt or inherent beauty. The art object has its own inbuilt or inherent beauty. The art object has its own inbuilt or inherent beauty. The art object has its own inbuilt or inherent beauty. Inherent. Inbuilt beauty or inherent beauty. Of course, these ideas are derived from Plato and Aristotle. These ideas are derived from classical humanists like Plato and Aristotle about the inherent beauty of the work of literature. The inherent beauty of the work of literature. But someone like David Hume says that beauty is in the eye of the beholder. Beauty is perspectival. Beauty is perspectival. Beauty is in the eye of the beholder. Depends on what you see. What is beautiful to you might not be beautiful to another person. But to the classical humanists, there was an inbuilt objective beauty in the work of art that could be discerned by everyone. But now beauty is relative. Literature is a weapon. If I say literature is a weapon, never forget the fact that literature is a weapon. Okay? Literature is a weapon because it can be used to fight causes. Fight causes. CAUSES. For the liberation of the oppressed. For the change in society. Can be used to bring about changes in society. Many great wars have been fought and won using literature compared to using armies. Because of how powerful writing is. Literature is that. Finally, literature is that which narrates the human story. Literature is that which narrates the human story. Literature narrates the human story. Remember that the object of literature is human. And literature is always situated in the human world. The object of literature is human, and literature is always situated in the human world. That means whether it is set in space, in Mars, set on the ground, set in hell, it's always the human story. Literature tells powerful human stories. In literature, we find our experiences. In literature, we find our experiences, we reflect upon our experiences. In literature, we see ourselves, we see our struggles, we see our triumphs. In literature, we find our existential paradigms. Because literature basically is a reflection of human society. Literature basically is what? A reflection of human society. And that's where we are going to pause, and when we come again, we will talk about how literature, we'll talk about classical criticism, which views literature as imitation and which views literature as mirror of society.